The day my son locked me out of my own house, I still had a pan of lasagna cooling on the stove. He didn't just lock the door, he changed all the locks, took all the money from my bank account, and told the neighbors I was losing my mind. And the worst part, before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me and others what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late. Share it in the comments below. Thanks. He smiled like he was proud of it. I had given him everything I had, and he took it all, then tried to tell me I was crazy for noticing. But what he didn't know was I already had a plan. By the time I was finished, I would get back every dollar he stole and every lie he spread. I'd make sure he regretted ever touching my pension. The first time I saw him in court, he gave me this smug little grin, like he thought he'd already won. The last time, the police were leading him out in handcuffs. It all started on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were my little treat days. I'd go downtown, buy one of those fancy cinnamon buns, and sit by the window pretending I wasn't lonely. That morning was like any other, quiet and predictable. My coffee tasted burnt, again because I never got around to fixing my old coffee pot. Around 10:30, I was folding laundry when I heard a knock on the door. I didn't even look through the peephole. I knew that it was Ethan. He always knocked like he was some big important guest. My heart actually fluttered a little. My son showing up without calling first. That hadn't happened in 2 years. I opened the door and started to smile, about to say, "Well, look who finally came by." But before I could finish, he wrapped his arms around me in a tight hug. For a second, it felt like we were back in the old days. He smelled like too much cologne and something sour I couldn't place. I invited him in and told him to sit down. We started the usual small talk. How was work? How was his apartment? How was the weather where he lived? He said he needed some coffee, and I thought, sure, that's fair, since he had surprised me with a visit. While I was in the kitchen pouring coffee into my favorite blue mug with the chipped handle, I was half dreaming that maybe this was it. Maybe he was finally here to say sorry for the last time we fought. When he told me I didn't understand money any more, then I heard it. The deadbolt clicking shut. At first, I thought I imagined it. I called out, "Ethan," and walked back to the door still holding the mug. But when I got there, he was standing on the other side, staring at me through the peephole like I was a stranger. I grabbed the doorknob and tried to turn it, but it wouldn't move. I let out a short laugh, thinking it had to be some kind of prank. "Very funny," I said. He didn't laugh. He just spoke through the door, his voice low and flat. "I'm claiming what's mine." I froze. That's not something your child should ever say, especially when you've spent your whole life clipping coupons and skipping vacations to pay for his college. I knocked, just a little at first, still confused. "Ethan, open the door." Nothing. "Ethan, open the damn door." Still nothing. I started knocking harder, feeling my heart race. My phone was on the table. My keys were in the bowl by the door. My wallet was in my purse on the couch. I had nothing but my slippers and that blue coffee mug. After a minute, he spoke again, calm like he was talking about the weather. "It's better this way, Mom. You'll understand soon." Then I heard him walk away. The door to the garage opened, and the car engine started. I ran to the window and watched him back out of the driveway in my car. That's when it hit me, like a punch to the chest. He'd planned this all along. He knew I'd let him in. He knew I'd trust him. I sat down on the porch step, holding that stupid mug, feeling like the whole world had gone hollow. I don't know how long I sat there. 10 minutes, an hour. Time didn't feel real. Finally, my neighbor Carol came outside to water her plants. She looked over and asked, "Louise, are you locked out?" Like I'd just forgotten my keys. I didn't know what to say. "What do you tell someone?" "No, Carol, my son just stole my house." She hurried over and helped me stand. She brought me inside and let me use her phone to call the police, but the police said it was a family matter. Since Ethan used to live there years ago, they couldn't just kick him out without a court order. I hung up without saying goodbye. Carol made me tea, but my hands were shaking too much to hold the cup. That night, when Carol's cousin the locksmith finally got me back into my house, I checked the little lockbox I kept hidden under the floorboards. It was gone. He'd taken my pension papers, some cash, and a few pieces of jewelry that weren't worth much money but meant everything to me. He didn't just lock me out. He took everything. But the worst part wasn't the missing things. It was knowing that the only person I'd trusted with my whole heart had looked me right in the eye and decided I was just in his way. That was the day I stopped thinking of myself as a mother first. That was the day I decided I was going to fight back. The morning after Ethan locked me out, I hardly slept a wink. I kept peeking out the window every 10 minutes, half expecting him to come back and take even more from me, or maybe just to make sure I was still scared. I lay there in Carol's guest room, staring up at the ceiling, and wondering how many of my neighbors were already believing the story Ethan was spreading about me losing my mind. He didn't waste any time telling people. That day, I called the police again to file a report. The officer on the phone sounded so young, like he was fresh out of school and just reading words off a piece of paper. He asked if Ethan had hurt me. No. Did I feel like I was in danger right then? No, not exactly. Was Ethan officially living in my house? I said no, but I hesitated a little, because over the years, he'd stayed with me off and on. That tiny pause was enough. The officer said I'd have to take it up in civil court, not criminal court, and that these situations can be tricky. That's what he called it, tricky, like I'd locked myself out by accident instead of being robbed by my own son. I hung up and just stared at my purse, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. After a few minutes, I picked up the phone again and called the bank. The woman on the line sounded so chipper at first, but when I said my name, her tone changed. She told me she couldn't talk to me about my account anymore because it had been changed to Guardian Access. I said, Guardian? I don't have a guardian. She put me on hold. When she came back, she sounded nervous. She said there were documents on file giving Ethan power of attorney and claiming I had memory problems. She told me I'd have to come in person to fix it. I felt this hot wave of anger and shame rush through me. My face was burning. My hands were shaking. But they were steady enough that I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew exactly what he'd done. I just didn't know how far he was willing to go. That afternoon, Carol drove me to the bank. I tried to look like my old self, put on a nice blouse, a pair of earrings, a bit of lipstick. But the banker looked at me the way you look at a stray cat, kind but guarded, like he didn't want me to cause trouble. I told him I wanted to undo the changes. He said I'd need new medical records and maybe a court order. I asked, why do I have to prove I'm not losing my mind when I never agreed that I was in the first place? He didn't have an answer. I demanded to see the papers Ethan had used. After some back and forth, he handed me a copy. It was a letter from someone named Dr. Robert Lyman, saying I had dementia and couldn't handle my own money. The date on the letter was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, I was doing my taxes by hand and winning the crossword puzzle contest at the senior center. I'd never even heard of this doctor. There was a phone number on the letter, so I called it right there, in the office. It was disconnected. Of course it was. That's when it really sank in. Ethan hadn't just stolen my money and my house. He was trying to erase me as a person. He wanted everyone to believe I was no longer able to take care of myself, so he could justify taking everything I had. If someone asked questions, he'd just say, she's not well, and people would nod along. That night, back at Carol's place, I was halfway through a bowl of soup that had gone cold when I suddenly remembered Sir Ethan's ex-wife. They hadn't spoken in years since the divorce, but I still had her number saved in my phone under a different name because Ethan once told me to stay out of his past. I called her. She picked up after 4 rings, sounding puzzled. I said who I was. There was a short silence. Then she asked, Louise, are you okay? It nearly knocked the wind out of me. No one had asked me that in days, like they truly meant it. I said, no, I'm not okay. I think Ethan is trying to destroy me. She was quiet for a moment, then let out a heavy sigh. And she said something I'll never forget. You're not the first. The next day, she came to pick me up in her old car. She looked tired but calm. She bought me a coffee and sat there listening, as I told her everything. When I finished, she looked me in the eye and said quietly, he tried the same thing with me when we split. Told everyone I was unstable. Tried to get me fired from my nursing job. I was stunned. All those years, I'd thought Sarah was just being dramatic because Ethan always made her sound that way. But here she was, the only person stepping up to help me. She reached into her bag and handed me a folder. These are from our divorce, she said. Screenshots, messages, even some recordings. I didn't know who to give them to. Maybe now they'll help. She didn't say it, but I could tell. She still carried all that hurt like a hidden scar. We didn't hug, That's not who we are. But we sat there together in her car a little longer than we needed to, both of us staring straight ahead. That night, for the first time in days, I slept better. Not because everything was fixed far from it, but because I finally knew I wasn't alone. And when I woke up the next morning, I had a plan. If Ethan wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I decided right then that if Ethan wanted to act like I was helpless, I'd show him exactly how dangerous an old woman with nothing left to lose could be. The day after meeting with Sarah, I went back to the bank. I didn't expect them to suddenly believe me, but I knew I needed copies, some kind of paper trail I could take to someone smarter than me, who might know what to do next. The woman at the counter was young, maybe in her early 20s, and she looked so nervous, like she wished she was anywhere else. She said she couldn't give me anything without the guardian's permission. I almost laughed. I leaned in and told her, "Sweetheart, I'm the one who gave birth to that so-called guardian, and he can't even spell fiduciary." She looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her up, but eventually, she handed me a customer service number. That number led me through the world's longest voicemail menu. It felt like some test to see how badly I really wanted my life back. 2 hours later, after taking a break for a sandwich, I finally got a phone appointment with the supervisor. His name was Todd. Of course it was Todd. He was polite and careful, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I told Todd everything. That I'd never signed any papers giving Ethan power over my money. That I'd never even met the doctor who wrote that letter about me having dementia. That I wasn't sick. Todd said he'd escalate it. I asked what that actually meant, and he said it meant someone else would take a look. I wanted to scream, but instead, I thanked him. Because when you get older, that's what you do. You keep saying thank you, even to people who are failing you. Because sometimes politeness is the only thing you still control. Back at Carol's, I sat down with Sarah and Curtis, the legal aid lawyer she knew. Curtis was young and sharp and just mad enough on my behalf that I actually liked him for it. He asked to see everything. The bank letters, the fake medical note, the folder Sarah had brought. He flipped through the papers fast, like he'd done this 100 times. Then he looked up and said something I wasn't ready to hear. "We're going to need to pull your credit report." I asked why. He said, "Because if your son got power of attorney and access to your ID, there's a good chance he didn't stop at your bank account." My stomach dropped, and he was right. 2 days later, when the report came back, it was like reading the story of a stranger pretending to be me. There were 2 credit cards I'd never applied for. One was maxed out to nearly $30,000 cash withdrawals and online poker. The other was full of charges for electronics and plane tickets. There was even a car loan application for a 2019 BMW. I haven't driven anything newer than my old 2005 Toyota. Curtis flipped through it all. His jaw clenched. "This isn't just stealing your money," he said. "He's trying to build an entire life in your name." It felt like the walls were moving, like nothing was steady anymore. I kept thinking, what if I'd never checked? What if I'd just stayed at Carol's drinking tea, believing this was some big misunderstanding? I would have ended up with debt, collectors at my door, and no house to go home to. Curtis started working on a cease and desist letter. But he told me we'd need more proof, more bank records, phone logs, anything that showed Ethan doing this behind my back. That's when I remembered the little fireproof safe I'd kept hidden under the floorboards before Ethan took it. I told them about it, and Sarah guessed he'd probably taken all the papers inside and scanned them. "If we can prove he used those documents without your permission," Curtis said, "we'll have a real case." Then he got an idea. He started searching for reverse mortgages tied to my name. Sure enough, he found it. My house was part of a pending reverse mortgage loan. The kind they sell to seniors on TV like it's some miracle solution. Ethan had forged my signature and faked all the paperwork. The only reason the loan hadn't gone through yet was that they were waiting on one last step in-person approval, and he was probably planning to fake that too, or pressure me into signing. I just sat there, staring at the screen. That's when I realized how far he'd gone. This wasn't some moment of weakness. This wasn't desperation. This was a plan, put together step by step over weeks or months, like a puzzle where the goal was to erase me, take everything, and wear my name until it was empty. I didn't cry. I think I'd run out of tears by then. I sat there, boiling in a kind of anger I didn't know I could feel. Curtis looked me in the eye and said, "We can fight this. It's going to be messy, but we can fight. And I believed him. But right then, I also knew something with total certainty. If Ethan was willing to rewrite my whole life on paper, he'd do worse face to face. So that day, I stopped hoping he'd apologize. I stopped wondering what went wrong when he was little, and I started thinking about how to take everything back. I stopped thinking of Ethan as my son. In my mind, he became nothing more than a thief with my name on his bank card. After Curtis showed me how deep all the identity theft went, I couldn't stop wondering how long he'd been planning it. It was like realizing you'd been living next to a volcano for years and only just noticed the smoke. Every time I opened a drawer or thought about some old paperwork I'd tucked away, I had to ask myself, did he already get his hands on this too? That night, I couldn't sleep, so I sat at Carol's kitchen table flipping through the folder Sarah had given me. Most of it was from their divorce emails, bank transfers, screenshots of text messages where Ethan called her crazy, accused her of cheating, and tried to confuse her about their money. His tone was so familiar. That same cold, smug way he talked to me, only even meaner, like he didn't see her as a real person at all. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. A little pink USB drive clipped to a paperclip. There was an audio file on a Taya voicemail from Ethan. His voice was slurred, but clear enough. I don't care what the court says. You owe me. I made this whole life for you, and I can take it back just as easy. I realized I was grinding my teeth so hard my jaw hurt. The next morning, I asked Sarah if we could talk somewhere quiet. She picked me up in her old car, and we drove to the park. It was pretty empty, just a few people walking their dogs or jogging by. We sat there in her car with the windows cracked open. I told her everything Curtis had found, and she didn't even look surprised. Instead, she reached into her glove and pulled out an envelope. I wasn't sure if I should bring this, she said. It's from after the divorce, when he really started to spiral. I thought he might calm down, but then he sent me this. Inside was a printout of an email chain between Ethan and someone named Nate Trillman. At first, it looked like boring business talk wire transfers, project timelines, but Curtis had taught me what to look for. One email had an attachment called L. Bennett Pension Breakdown.xls. I felt like I was going to throw up. Sarah leaned her head back against the seat. I didn't know what it meant back then, she said. I thought it was maybe about some inheritance. But now, I think he was already planning to move your money around. I asked how she got it, and she told me she'd hacked into one of Ethan's old Gmail accounts after the divorce back when he'd left himself logged in on her laptop. She'd saved everything, just in case. I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner. She looked down at her hands and said, because I didn't think you'd believe me. You always acted like I was being too hard on him, like he was just stressed, and she wasn't wrong. Back when they were married, I always tried to stay neutral. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place to get in the middle. I didn't want to pick sides, but the truth was, not choosing sides was still a choice, and I'd chosen to believe the version of Ethan he wanted me to see. We drove straight to Curtis's office with the envelope. He was already on a call but waved us in. When he saw the emails, he sat up straighter. This changes everything, he said. The emails showed Ethan hadn't just been stealing on a whim, he'd been planning for months, maybe longer, and he wasn't working alone. Curtis did a quick background check and found out that Nate Trillman had ties to shady companies and offshore accounts. Nothing huge, but enough to raise big red flags. Curtis said, we'd have to build a case, proving Ethan used these connections to hide stolen money. We're talking about wire fraud now, he said. This isn't just identity theft. This is organized. I looked over at Sarah. She was staring at the floor, arms crossed tight across her chest. I reached out and touched her elbow. You did the right thing, I said, and I meant it. She gave me a tired little smile. On the way home, we stopped by her place so she could grab some old hard drives. I watched her walk up to her apartment door with that slow, practiced way of someone who's been carrying too much for too long, and she had bucket carols. I sat on the guest bed and pulled out one of my old planners. In the margins, I'd scribbled reminders: call Ethan, check in, ask if he needs anything. I used to worry so much about whether he felt supported. I never once stopped to ask myself if he was using that support like a rope to help himself up or to slowly choke me. I shut the planner and put it away. I didn't need reminders anymore. I needed proof dates, names, receipts. We weren't just telling the truth now. We were building a case. and thanks to Sarah, we finally had our first real crack in Ethan's perfect little story. Curtis moved fast once he saw the emails. He filed an emergency request for a protective order and started writing up the lawsuit paperwork. But what I didn't expect was how quickly Ethan would hit back. Less than a week later, a courier knocked on Carol's door and handed me a thick stack of legal papers. It felt heavier than it looked. Ethan had filed a petition in probate court claiming I was unfit to manage my money and needed a conservator or him. He was trying to make his theft official. Curtis said we had to get to court and fast. The hearing was going to decide if the judge thought I could still handle my own life or if Ethan would get to keep control of my money. That weekend, I stayed at Sarah's apartment and went through every piece of mail I'd ever sent to Ethan. Over the past year, insurance papers, tax forms, pension letters. Back then, I thought I was just being helpful, making it easier for him to help me. But now I could see it clearly. I'd handed him everything he needed to shut me out. The court date came faster than I expected. I put on my nicest blazer, the one with the old shoulder pads, and the only shoes I owned that didn't hurt my feet. Curtis met us on the courthouse steps. He looked calm and steady, like this was just another day at work. I tried to soak up some of that calm, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Inside the courtroom, we sat across from Ethan and his lawyer. Ethan didn't even look at me. He was clean-shaven, dressed in a navy suit I'd never seen before, probably bought with my money, and he looked so sure of himself, like he'd already won. When the judge walked in, we all stood. I held my head high, but it felt like the weight of everything was pressing down on my shoulders. Ethan's lawyer went first. He called me a sweet woman with a deteriorating mind. He said I was easily confused, couldn't handle my finances, and was prone to paranoia. I almost laughed. If I was so confused, how did I remember every detail about the fake letters and the stolen money? Then they brought in their so-called expert, a real doctor this time, not the made-up one from before. But he had never examined me. He just talked about aging in general, about how older people sometimes get mixed up. He used big, fancy phrases like plausible misjudgments and pattern of risk. Instead of just telling the truth that my own son was robbing me blind. When it was finally my turn, Curtis asked if I felt okay speaking. I nodded, even though my throat felt dry and my stomach was in knots. He started with the easy questions: my name, my birthday, where I lived, who the president was. Then he asked me to tell the judge what happened. I looked her straight in the eye and said everything as simply and clearly as I could about the forged documents, the reversed bank transactions, the voicemail Ethan left for Sarah, the car he drove away in that belonged to me. I told her I knew I hadn't been a perfect mother, but I wasn't confused. I knew exactly what betrayal looked like. The judge listened without showing much emotion, and that made me more nervous than anything else. Then Ethan's lawyer stood up to question me. He asked if I'd ever forgotten my keys, if I'd ever gotten lost while driving, if I'd ever missed an appointment. I told him yes, because who hasn't? He tried to twist it around, saying that leaning on Sarah and Curtis proved I couldn't take care of myself. I looked at him and said, I have friends, not handlers. He didn't like that, but I could feel the room shifting a little. Then Curtis brought out the credit reports and the papers showing Ethan's fake company. The courtroom got very quiet. The judge asked about the flash drive Sarah had given us. The clerk confirmed it was real evidence. Inside were scans of my pension statements, all labeled for export, along with proof that Ethan's old computer had logged in to steal them. Nobody in the room made a sound, but I saw it in Ethan's face, the first crack in his calm. He blinked a lot, shifted in his chair, tugged at his tie like it was choking him. The judge didn't decide anything that day. She said she'd go over everything and send us her decision in writing. The drive back to Carol's felt longer than ever. I didn't cry, but I didn't say much either. My head was spinning with every word I'd spoken, every detail I might have left out. What if I'd stumbled too much? What if I hadn't sounded sure enough? What if she believed him? Curtis told me we'd done well. Sarah said I looked like a woman who knew exactly who she was, but I didn't feel that way at all. I just felt tired. Not the kind of tired that goes away after a nap, kind that sinks into your bones and stays there. That night, I went to bed early, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the judge's face, not angry, not sympathetic, just impossible to read. And that scared me more than anything, because it meant we were still stuck in limbo, still playing Ethan's game. and I had no idea how much time I had left before he made his next move. 3 days after the hearing, I was still waiting. Every hour felt twice as long as it should. I kept checking my phone, even though I knew there wouldn't be a message yet. I paced around Carol's living room so much, I thought I'd wear a path into the carpet. Curtis had warned me it could take a week, maybe longer. He said no news didn't mean bad news. But logic doesn't help much when your whole life is sitting on a stranger's desk. I tried to distract myself. Sarah brought groceries and some old crime show DVDs she thought I'd like. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. We sat down to watch, but halfway through, I realized I hadn't heard a single word of it. Sarah noticed. She muted the TV and looked at me. "You look like you're waiting for a thunderstorm," she said. I sighed. "Feels more like a tornado." She didn't argue. That night, when I couldn't sleep, I went into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. That night, I stood by the window in Carol's kitchen, staring out at the dark. Everything was quiet until I saw headlights slow down in front of the house. They didn't just pass by, they paused, like whoever was inside was watching us. My skin prickled. I didn't recognize the car, but something in my gut told me it wasn't good. I turned off the kitchen light and went back to bed, but there was no way I could sleep. I just lay there with my eyes open, listening to every little creak and rustle. Around 2 a.m, there was a loud crack like something breaking. My heart jumped into my throat. Carol yelled from her bedroom. I bolted down the hall, and when I got to the living room, the big front window was shattered. Broken glass glittered across the rug like salt. In the middle of the floor sat a rock. Sarah had stayed over that night, thank God. She was already calling the police while I just stood there trying to catch my breath. When the officers showed up, they looked around, took some notes, and said they'd file a report. But there wasn't much they could do. No cameras, no fingerprints, no witnesses. One of them asked if I had any enemies. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Only my son." He gave me this look like he didn't know whether I was serious. After they left, Sarah and I picked up the glass in silence. We didn't have to say anything. The silence itself said everything we were feeling. Fear, anger, dread. The next morning, Carol put up a camera above the porch. Her nephew came over with his tools, and he didn't ask a single question. I was grateful for that. Curtis called and said he'd start pushing for a restraining order, but he warned me that without clear proof Ethan had done it, the court might not agree. So Sarah and I stayed on edge. We took turns being home. She added extra locks to her doors. We kept the lights on, even during the day. Living like that, jumping at every sound, does something to you. Every time a car drove by or a door slammed somewhere on the street, my heart would pound like it was going to crack my ribs. A couple of days later, Sarah's car got keyed. Deep scratches carved all along the driver's side. No note, no cameras, no witnesses. We didn't even bother calling the police this time. We just looked at each other and knew. Later that week, Curtis asked me to come into his office. He looked serious, but not panicked, so I tried to breathe. He handed me a thick envelope and said, "Someone's been messing with my mail." Inside were 2 letters from the court, both meant for me, both dated nearly 2 weeks ago. One was about a follow-up hearing. The other was about Ethan's request to become my conservator. Neither had ever reached Curtis directly. He only found them because his receptionist noticed one envelope had a tear in the corner and got suspicious. I asked him, "How does something like that even happen?" He sighed. "We checked the building's security cameras. Ethan showed up here after hours last week. He was in the lobby for 7 minutes. I stared at him, my stomach turning over. Ethan had been so closer than I'd ever guessed. Curtis said they were checking to see if anything else had gone missing. I asked, "How did he even get inside?" "He used an old guest code we stopped using months ago," Curtis said quietly. "We just never disabled it." I didn't answer. I just sat there holding the letters like they might vanish if I blinked. Curtis leaned forward. "This isn't just manipulation anymore," he said. "It's sabotage." And I believed him. That night, I packed a small suitcase and moved in with Sarah. I couldn't stay at Carol's any longer. I couldn't risk something happening to her because of me. Sarah set up a cot in her spare room. We put in 2 more cameras, one watching the back door and one aimed at the street. I started sleeping with the hallway light on. I kept my phone under my pillow. Every tiny noise made me jump, but underneath all that fear, I felt something else for the first time in weeks, a sense of focus. Ethan thought he was scaring me into giving up. He wanted me to feel hunted and alone, but really, he'd just lit a fire under me, and he had no idea how hot it was going to burn. Curtis said the next step was to find out exactly who Ethan was, working with Batman, looking closer at the names Sarah had found in those old emails. Nate Trollman. Neither of us knew who Nate was, but Curtis ran a background check. Turns out Nate had started a bunch of little companies over the years, most of them now shut down. A few had been flagged on financial watch lists for shady offshore transactions. Nothing that screamed criminal mastermind, but enough to make you pay attention, Curtis said. If Ethan moved any of your money through this guy, we have to figure out what and how. Meanwhile, Sarah and I kept up our routines. We saved every receipt, every email, every login record. Curtis set up a secure folder where we stored all the evidence. Sometimes it felt silly, like we were two women preparing for battle with the filing cabinet. But then, I'd look at the boarded-up window, or the scratches on Sarah's car, or those stolen letters, and I'd remember, this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, and I'd already let Ethan take too much of it for too long. A few days later, Curtis called with news. He'd tracked one of Ethan's transactions to a dormant checking account under Nate's name, and that was the first real thread we could pull. The trail of money ended there. That old account had been closed just a week after the funds came in, but it was enough to prove Ethan and this Nate guy were connected. I looked at Curtis and asked, "Is that illegal?" He said, "It will be once we show why he did it, like something out of a bad movie." The very next day, Sarah called me while I was out with Carol. She sounded out of breath. "You need to come over. I found something." When I got to her apartment, she was sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor holding an old shoebox. "I was cleaning the closet," she said, "and this was hidden behind a fake panel." Inside, the box was a little black USB flash drive, scratched up, no label. She said, "It used to be Ethan's. He must have left it behind years ago and forgotten all about it." We plugged it into her laptop, half expecting it to be empty or just full of junk. But what we found made my stomach twist into a knot. There were dozens of files. Some were PDFs of my bank statements, labeled LB Archive. Others were photos of signed forms, except when Sarah zoomed in, we saw they weren't just scans. They had been edited. My signature had been copied and pasted onto different pension papers. The computer showed the date the file was created, 3 months before Ethan locked me out. Sarah kept digging. In a folder called Ref, she clicked on a video file. It was a short clip of Ethan, sitting at a kitchen table, laughing. He said, "She has no idea I could be buying guns with her money and she'd still be talking about Sunday brunch." He was so casual, so proud of himself. I felt sick. Sarah didn't laugh either. She just looked at me and shook her head. Curtis came over that night. We showed him everything. He didn't say much, just nodded and wrote notes while the video played. "This is the smoking gun," he said quietly, literally. He asked if he could copy the flash drive and keep track of exactly who handled it, so no one could claim it was fake later. We handed it over. The next morning, Curtis filed the video and all the other evidence in our civil case. He also told the district attorney's office about it, and just like that, everything changed. At first, the DA's office only asked a few questions. Then, when they saw the forged documents and the video, they got serious. Curtis said if we were lucky, Ethan wouldn't just be facing a civil lawsuit. He could actually be charged with crimes, fraud, identity theft, maybe even elder abuse. It felt strange to feel hope. Not the big, cheering kind, just a small, steady feeling in my chest, like maybe finally someone was seeing the truth. That weekend, I cleaned out my old purse and found a folded gas station receipt from the day Ethan locked me out. I'd bought him snacks, thinking he was just stressed and needed comfort. That made me furious all over again, how I'd tried to be a good mother to someone who saw me as nothing but a mark. But this time, the anger felt clean. It felt useful, like fuel. That night, Sarah and I stayed up late. We labeled folders, sorted evidence, and drank sweet tea that made my teeth ache. She looked over at me and asked, "You think he knows we're coming for him?" I said, "He will." Because for the first time, I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing. And Ethan had no idea how much trouble I was about to be. After the DA got involved, Curtis told us to lay low. He said that once Ethan found out about the investigation, he'd either panic or double down. and neither option would be quiet. It didn't take long to see what he meant. The first sign came from the library, of all places. I'd worked there for over 30 years. Even after I retired, I still visited every few weeks to chat with old friends. That day, I walked in like usual, but right away, I could feel something was off. People looked at me differently, polite, but nervous. Dana, one of the young women at the front desk who used to help me carry boxers, pulled me aside. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I told her I was fine. She hesitated, then said, "It's just we saw something online." My stomach flipped. She pulled out her phone and showed me a Facebook post from some page I'd never heard of, but that a lot of people in town followed. It was a video. The screen showed an older woman wandering around a backyard, yelling at squirrels. But it wasn't me. It wasn't even my yard. They'd taken a blurry clip of someone who sort of looked like me from behind and added a fake voiceover. The caption said, "Sad to see what dementia does to our elders. Prayers for Louise Bennett." Hundreds of people had shared it. My face went hot. Dana looked embarrassed and sorry, but I just thanked her and walked straight out the door. By the time I got back to Sarah's, the video was all over the local groups and message boards. Curtis called me that night, furious. He said someone had tried to send that video to the court as evidence, anonymously. Thankfully, he caught it before it got added to the case file. "He's not just playing dirty," Curtis said. "He's trying to destroy your reputation in public so the court will doubt you in private." And in that moment, any last shred of guilt I'd felt about fighting back disappeared. I asked Curtis what we could do about it. He said, "We keep building the case. We stay focused. We don't stoop to his level." It sounded noble, but if I'm honest, I wanted to stoop. I wanted to kick something, to throw things and scream until my throat hurt. But instead, I printed out the video post and added it to the evidence folder. A few days later, Curtis filed another request for a restraining order, this time including the new mail tampering footage and the video of Ethan bragging. We weren't just showing harassment anymore. We were showing it was escalating. This time, the court approved it. Ethan was officially banned from contacting me directly, from coming near Sarah's apartment, or from showing up at Curtis's office. It felt like a small win, but it was still a win. That night, I finally slept 6 full hours without waking up in a panic. But, as if he could sense we'd gained ground, Ethan struck back. Curtis got an alert from a contact at the bank. Someone had tried logging into one of my pension accounts again. This time, whoever it was used credentials from a third-party service. The login failed, but it triggered a fraud warning. The attempt came from a server outside the US, masked by a VPN. Curtis said it was probably Ethan, trying to move whatever money was left before we could freeze it. We filed a report, but it made one thing perfectly clear. He wasn't going to stop. Then, not long after, I got an envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a printed form, an LLC registration listing my name as the founder of a business. I'd never heard of Bennett Senior Services LLC. It claimed I'd employed Ethan as my paid in-home caregiver for the past 2 years and even listed Sarah's apartment as the business address. The nerve of him. He was trying to create a fake business to launder stolen pension payments and make it look like he was just taking care of me. Curtis was furious when he saw it. He immediately filed it with the district attorney along with a formal complaint for attempted financial fraud through a false business entity. It felt like watching all Ethan's careful lies start to unravel at once. He was running out of ways to cover his tracks. One night, Sarah and I sat at her kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, flash drives, court letters, and sticky notes. I looked at the mess and said, "This isn't how I thought my retirement would look." She smirked and handed me a cat-shaped sticky note. "You're kind of badass," she said. I didn't say it out loud, but for the first time, I actually believed her. The fight wasn't over, far from it, but for once, I felt like we were winning, not just surviving, actually taking back control. And Ethan, for all his slick moves and dirty tricks, was running out of places to hide. The official court date landed on a Wednesday. It felt fitting somehow, right in the middle of the week. Not the start or the finish, just the moment things would finally shift. Curtis was ready. So were we. He'd organized everything. The forged documents, the flash drive, the bank reports, Sarah's screenshots, the video of Ethan bragging, and the LLC paperwork. It was all stacked neatly in a big box with tabs and colored labels. I looked at it and thought, If paperwork could scream, this box would be shouting. Sarah and I got to the courthouse early. She wore a dark blazer I hadn't seen before and kept tapping her fingers on the armrest. I asked, "You nervous?" She said, "I just want it over with." I felt the same. Curtis joined us 10 minutes before the hearing.com, as ever. He said everything was going to be all right. I nodded, but I knew I wouldn't believe it until I heard the gavel hit the wood. When they called us in, Ethan was already sitting there with his lawyer. Same smug look, same polished performance. He looked thinner, though. He kept checking his phone like he knew time was running out. The judge entered. We all stood, then sat. First, the judge asked if there were any new updates to the case. Curtis stood and handed over the newest documents, the fake business registration, complete with cross-referenced address records proving Ethan had filed government forms pretending to be my caretaker while he was siphoning off my pension. That got the judge's attention. Then it was time for witnesses. Sarah went first. She walked to the stand like she'd done it 100 times, steady and composed. She testified about her marriage to Ethan, about the threats he made, and about the evidence she'd found and saved. Then Curtis asked her about the email folder with Nate Trillman's name. She explained everything, how she discovered it, why she kept it, and what she believed Ethan and Nate were doing. Ethan's lawyer tried to rattle her, bringing up her past relationship with Ethan and suggesting she held a grudge. Sarah didn't flinch. "If I had a grudge," she said, "he'd know it." I kept quiet because I was scared. "I'm not scared anymore." The whole room went silent after that. Then Curtis called the bank manager from my credit union. He testified under oath that account changes had been made without in-person verification. He said login attempts had been flagged and the devices used matched ones tied to Ethan's IP addresses. After that came the digital forensics expert Curtis Hayada, soft-spoken man with glasses. He explained how Ethan's laptop, confirmed by purchase records, had been used to edit the PDF files tied to my pension withdrawals. Then he played the video clip from the flash drive. Ethan, sitting there, laughing about stealing my money. The silence that followed wasn't shock so much as final. Like everyone in the courtroom had seen enough. Ethan's lawyer looked like he'd swallowed a fistful of tacks. When Curtis finished presenting our case, the judge turned to Ethan, sighed, and asked if they wanted to proceed. Ethan's lawyer stood up, leaned over, and whispered something to him. Then Ethan did something I'll never forget. He stood up, even though nobody had asked him to, and blurted out, "She ruined my future. You think I wanted to be some broke failure? I deserved that money. She owed me. Everything she had, she got because of me." The judge raised her hand to tell him to sit. He didn't. He kept ranting about sacrifices, about how I hadn't helped him enough, how he was entitled to at least some of it. Court officers stepped forward. Only then did he stop. The judge looked at me, then at Ethan, then down at all the files in front of her. She said she was ready to rule. Her decision was short, clear, and final. Ethan's conservatorship petition was denied. All power of attorney documents were voided. My accounts would be returned to my full control. Ethan would be reported to the state attorney general for criminal charges, financial fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. He would be taken into custody for violating the restraining order by tampering with the mail. When the gavel came down, I finally let my shoulders drop. Sarah touched my arm. Curtis nodded. Ethan was led out in handcuffs, still trying to talk, but nobody was listening anymore. We walked out of that courtroom into the light like survivors stepping out of a storm shelter. Even though my heart was still pounding and my knees felt weak, I walked taller than I had in a long time, because we didn't just win. We exposed everything, and there was no taking it back. After the ruling, everything moved faster than I'd expected. Ethan was taken into custody right there, in the courtroom. Just like that, the person who had turned my life upside down was no longer an open threat. I watched him leave in handcuffs, no special treatment, no last-minute speeches, just escorted through a side door like any other defendant who thought he was smarter than the law. Curtis handled most of the paperwork after the trial. He was calm and thorough, just like he'd been since day one, but I could see relief in his eyes. He told me restitution was already being processed. I'd get back whatever funds hadn't been moved offshore, plus a formal apology from the court for the delays in freezing Ethan's access. I didn't care much about the apology. But knowing I'd get my pension back meant I could finally stop counting cans in the pantry and pretending I wasn't worried about running out of shampoo. Back at Sarah's, we celebrated with cheap sparkling cider in plastic cups. Carol came by with a casserole and a stack of paper plates. It wasn't a big party, just a quiet night with the people who'd stood by me when it counted most. Curtis stayed for a while, then left with a thank you card I'd written the night before, and pretended I hadn't. Sarah and I sat on her couch and watched an old episode of Jeopardy! For once, I didn't feel like I needed to keep checking my phone or double-locking the door. A week later, I moved back into my house. I stood in the front yard a long time before I unlocked the door. It looked smaller somehow, not because the house had changed, but because I walked through each room, letting my fingers trail across the walls. I didn't cry, I just breathed. The air smelled a little dusty, like it had been waiting for me. I spent the next few days cleaning, fixing things Ethan had ignored, going through drawers and throwing out what didn't matter anymore, but I kept some things, a few old photos, a scarf he'd given me years ago, before everything went wrong. I didn't keep them out of sentiment. I just refused to let him take anything else from me, not even the good memories. Curtis asked if I'd be willing to speak at a local event he was organizing about elder fraud awareness. At first I said no. I didn't want to be the face of anything. I didn't want to be the woman who got robbed by her son. But then I thought about all those phone calls I'd made where nobody believed me. All the times someone used the word confused like it meant disposable. So I changed my mind. I stood in front of a room full of strangers, my hands trembling a little, and told the truth, not the polite version, not the cleaned up one, the real one. I told them what it felt like to be erased, to fight back, to win. People listened. A few came up afterward and asked for resources. Some said they had questions about their own families. That mattered more than I expected. A month later, I joined the advisory board for the legal aid clinic where Curtis worked. I wasn't doing anything fancy, just helping with admin, making coffee, answering phones. But it felt good to be part of something again, to have a purpose that wasn't only about surviving. Sarah came with me to a follow-up hearing when Ethan tried to appeal his sentence. It didn't go anywhere. The judge reviewed all the evidence and shut it down before Ethan could say more than a single sentence. He was sentenced to 5 years, with a mandatory restitution agreement. I didn't go to the formal sentencing. I didn't need to hear it to know it was over. What I did do, though, was mail him a photo. It was just me and Sarah standing outside the courthouse, holding hands, and smiling. No note, no threat, just a message. A reminder. I didn't send it out of spite. I sent it because he needed to understand he hadn't ended me. His plan hadn't worked. And I wanted him to see exactly what survival looked like. Last week, I stood in front of a packed room at the local community center. I was holding a microphone I hadn't asked for, reading a speech I'd scribbled on the back of an old electric bill. I told the audience, sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who know your favorite childhood story. That doesn't mean they get to keep the pen. People clapped, a few cried. When I stepped down from that stage, I felt something settle in me, like all the shattered pieces had finally found their place. I still have days where I flinch when the doorbell rings or double-check the locks before bed. But I don't live in fear anymore. I live in my home, on my terms. And after everything Ethan tried to take, I still have the one thing he couldn't forge, fake, or steal: my voice. And now I use it every damn day. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.